All right, I see. Thanks. Mr. Mayor, you ready? Let's call the meeting to order, please. And let's in lieu of invocation, let's put ourselves in the presence of prayer. Recognize a moment of silence, please. Thank you. We have any no minutes at this time. What I've asked before you came on, Mr. Mayor and Councilman Griffin, and looking at the agenda, what I'd like to do is, if you all would allow, to go to item H, get the stormwater management update business behind us, and then circle back to item G and entertain the small cell discussion as well as the Dominion tree trimming, if that's the pleasure of the committee. Hopefully we could do that. I guess I would need a motion to do that.
So moved.
So moved.
Right. Probably moved in second. Any discussion on that adjustment to the agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, would you please say aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Is Mr. Fountain on the line?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Could you address the H1, please?
Absolutely. The first item is for the low battery seawall project. This is approval of fee amendment number 6 in the amount of $284,944.25 with Johnson, Meerman, and Thompson, which is JMT. This is the phase 2 design and plan preparation services for the project. So in preparation of the next phase of the project.
Okay, is there a motion out there?
So moved.
Properly moved in
Second.
and seconded. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, would you please say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. H2, Mr. Fountain, the brick repair?
Yes, yeah. So this was a emergency brick arch repair. We had a relatively complex emergency repair on Liberty Street where we had to replace about 100 feet of arch, including installing a couple of different manholes for connection. And then we did take the opportunity while we were in there and had the entire street torn up to tie in the roadside drainage inlets into the brick arch section, which previously we'd had curb inlets that just didn't connect to anything in the street. So we did tie them into the brick arch as part of that restoration. But that will be on Ways and Means as an after the fact approval, as it was quite an expensive repair project. I believe it was, to pull that exact number, actually, I think it was $200,000. So it was a substantive improvement.
You know, it's after the fact. I still think the committee should entertain a motion on it.
So moved.
Properly moved in. Do we have a second by
Second.
the mayor? Any more discussion on that emergency repair? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any opposed? Thank you. Mr. Fountain, approval of additional roadwork transfer, is that, would that be out, Ms. Herdina?
So this is one I'm happy to handle. It's an alteration from an item we had previously. We had talked about taking the one block of South Market into the city street system from DOT as part of the Market Street project to avoid some of the encroachment permitting issues where DOT will likely request us to take over maintenance of all of that section as part of the permitting requirements. When we reached out to the committee had previously passed that or recommended that. When we reached out to DOT, they had indicated that they right now have a section that basically runs from Market on the one block that is Lingard Street and then one block of State Street. That is the only connectivity they have to that Lingard and State Street from the rest of the DOT system. So what they will normally do is they request you take that whole piece of disconnected road into your system as part of the request. So they've turned around basically and said, if the city would like this block of Market, you need to take over Lingard Street and this one block of Church Street. It does push it to a total request of 0.16 miles. Lingard Street is where there's the large hotel project going on. So I think there's actually enough streetscaping associated with that project that likely will be taking over most of the maintenance of that section of Lingard as well. But it does include this one block of State Street. The city currently maintains the remainder of State Street. But I wanted to at least get that to the committee's attention and see if that was something the committee was willing to entertain.
What's the pleasure of the committee?
So move.
Properly moved and
Second.
seconded by the mayor. Any more discussion on that adjustment? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Item 4, Barberry Woods Drainage Improvement, Mr. Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one is asking the committee to approve us to apply for another National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant. This one would be $250,000 of grant money with a match from the city of $250,000 for the Barbary Woods project. This is the NIFWIF grants come in 3 phases normally. There's sort of like a concept planning stage grant, there's a design phase grant, and then there's a final like implementation and construction phase grant. So we do have a Johns Island planning grant that we have been notified we've been awarded, that we're still finalizing the paperwork on it for the actual award. This would be for to apply for the design phase grant now within Barbary Woods. We'd be matching this out of the design work that the city would be doing for Barbary Woods that we have funding set aside in the drainage fund for. So this would basically help us just pay for the work planned in Barbary Woods.
Move for approval.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Church Creek, Mr. Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this one is a little bit of a blend of Church Creek and Lake Dotterer. This is, we have been looking at that, installing those additional pipes under Glenn McConnell as part of the county's road widening project.
Right.
That lake system helps drain Church Creek, which is why it's part of the Church Creek project. It also helps people who work on Lake Dotterer, who live on Lake Dotterer, but it does discharge water into Long Branch Creek, which has its own flooding challenges. So part of making that system work effectively is doing improvements in Long Branch Creek. This is actually another grant application with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to look at that preliminary work. So this is the first phase of those 3 NIFWIF phases. And we're actually partnering with NOAA, who is one of the major funding agencies for National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, is that this is a project that they've wanted to see done for quite some time. So I think that'll be a good partner for the project. I think we have a good chance of looking for this award.
Move
It
for approval,
ties
Mr.
well into what
Chairman.
we're doing.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded by Councilman Griffin. Listen, that's great work with that, I guess, trifecta with the different agencies working on that. Mr. Mayor and Mr. Fountain, so great teamwork on that. All in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 Any
Mr.
opposed?
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I
Councilman
noticed that something that I asked to be on the agenda is not on there today
Okay, what was that?
in regards to the easement abandonment and shadow moss.
Okay, I'm gonna take responsibility for that. I didn't get that on the agenda, so
Well, I
is that,
thought,
is that something that Mr. Fountain you can address?
We can talk about it a little bit. I think Councilman Griffin had been asking for some input from the legal department, maybe an executive session to talk about what the liabilities potentially were from easement abandonment. I certainly don't want to speak for Ms. Herdina, but I know it's been a very hectic last few weeks with the kind of emergency ordinances and some of the other. And I think I dropped the ball on a large part of that, of not having coordinated with Chip and with Susan for trying to put together what exactly how does that work and what is our input from the department level. So I certainly think that's probably at least partially
do
my
you
fault.
think that y'all can have it together by the second meeting in July?
Councilmember Griffin, this is Susan. I'm sure we can do that, and we can probably even have a discussion with you beforehand.
I want to make sure that you have have plenty of time to do it. And I know you have a lot going on. I just want to be able to get back to this homeowner and just kind of give him an update of where we're at. He's, asking me about it pretty much every week. And if I could just tell him that we've got it on the agenda by our second meeting in July, because aren't we doing 2 meetings in July?
Right.
Yeah.
We are.
I think I would like y'all to have some time, but is that enough time for you? You just me.
Councilmember Griffin, I don't know what the exact status of it is right now, so let us get back to you, but we will have it on either the first or the second agenda.
No problem. You take your time, Susan. Just let me know so I can get back with this gentleman. He might want to listen in or well, he won't be able to listen to the exact part, but just I'd like to be able to give him some sort of update of where we're at.
Certainly, we can do that.
So much.
All right, thank you, Councilman Griffin, for your patience too on that. And again, I want to thank the committee for leaping ahead, going to item H. Any more stormwater update information that, Mr. Fountain, that you'd like to share at this time?
I think that's all for this month, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Now, if we can go back to item G, Public Service Department updates. We've got 2 items here for some conversation. G1 is small cell 5G locations. Ms. Herdina, how are we going to lead this one off?
Well, 2 parts. Jordan Lanier is working on and has been working on the applications for installation of small cell technology in the city. I don't know if he's on this call or not, but looks like he may be. Jordan?
I am here, yes.
Okay.
Susan.
So
All
he's
right,
going to give an update on that, and then I was going to take a few minutes to just update council on the Crown Castle litigation and a few other matters that the city has been involved in related to 5G technology.
Okay, great. Jordan, can you take the baton from here?
Certainly, thank you, Councilman. Not entirely sure what information you're looking for. We have currently received 51 applications throughout the city. The majority are downtown, although we have received about 10 or so in West Ashley. Only 3 companies thus far, 3 carriers have applied. Crown Castle takes up the majority of those applications. They've applied for 32 small cell installations, all downtown. Verizon has applied for 11. AT&T has applied for 8. And yep, we have currently 34 issued permits as of today. We issued a chunk today. We have denied 4 permits, and we have 13 that remain under review.
I think one of the issues were, this technology being placed close to schools and playgrounds and public places like that, or parks. I think that was some of the issues. I don't, Ms. Odina can come and address that part, but are you?
Mr. Chairman.
That's some of the public pushback we have been.
Mr. Chairman, this is Tom.
Okay.
I'd like to jump in 1 second on this item. We've
right.
We've had a little
Jordan,
bit of
if you would allow, we'll hear from Mr. O'Brien. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We've had a little bit of problem with the subcontractors working for those major contractors that Jordan just mentioned. And at the current time, Crown Castle is under a stop work order. They did some work at the corner of East Bay and Broad Street, which was totally substandard to what our requirements are. So we've got them, and I've got a call into Ann Brooks, who's the contact with Crown Castle itself. And I'll be speaking with her tomorrow about the quality of their work and the subcontractors, because I think the mayor's seen some of the examples around town. We're just not happy. They're not finishing the work to our standards, and we're going to make sure they stay up on that. Just want to interject that for you.
All right, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Mayor, you want to address that at all, or that's fine?
No, I think that's a relevant comment.
It is. Yeah.
I think probably Susan is best to address the issue of where the locations are. Most of the applications, I will just add, have not been near a school. In fact, I don't remember any being near a school. There are some in residential areas, and we've been very careful to ask the applicants to try to add their equipment to existing poles wherever possible, rather than to add new poles, just to minimize the clutter, if you will, in our city, but particularly in the historic district. There was a creative solution that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, I think Crown Castle came forward with that, sometimes they require an equipment box near the pole. And so they came up with a good idea, and now we're asking them to do it in other places, of hiding their equipment box to look like a Big Belly trash can and then provide a free Big Belly trash can next to that so that there's a real trash can. So you have what looks like two trash cans. One's a real trash can and one is a fake equipment box. So it just blends into our environment a little more than otherwise would be the case, along with the pretty strong request we make to all of these applicants to try to locate their equipment on existing poles.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that information. I know, Ms. Medina, before you address, I see I've got Councilwoman Jackson on the line. She asked for this to be on the agenda. Out of courtesy, you have any comments, Ms. Jackson? Or
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think that you set the stage accurately for what we are hearing from citizens, increasingly numbers of citizens who are doing their own research, listening to, I think, a movement of legal research that's being done. And there actually are now sort of class action suit type attorneys who, are very well respected, who are taking this up as cause for concerns about public health safety. So I do feel like the more that we can delay installations in residential areas, especially around playgrounds, schools, anywhere we know that kids are going to congregate in open areas, the better we'll be served. There are cases now, evidently, that are going to be going against the FCC ruling. And if anything changes there, then we would be able to change our ordinance to be more protective, stay within the FCC umbrella that we're pledged to be under. So I salute the mayor. I know this ends up on his desk every time. And I do think that if Mr. Jordan is still on the line, I heard that of the existing applications, sometimes we don't have the corroboration. I think it's from AT&T. They're supposed to file some documentation that proves that they're following the regulations. I haven't tried to look at that myself, but that's what I hear from the advocates who are staying in touch with me.
To the best of my knowledge, every application we have in has been accompanied by a radio frequency report, which is the documentation we laid out in the ordinance that would show from a certified radio frequency engineer that all of these installations would meet the FCC guidelines for emitting, I suppose is the word, of radio frequency. So I haven't seen that any of them are lacking that. But, for the first, all 51 of these applications actually came in via a consultant we had hired who was doing the completeness check on all of these applications prior to having all of the internal processes hammered out and detailed. So none of I believe everything that we've issued has had that accompanying RF report that says this meets all the FCC guidelines. That was, they were required to have that before we even received the application in the city internally.
Oh, well, that's really good to know. Maybe I'll just send you a couple of addresses that I think, I was told about specifically, and you can use that as just your corroboration.
Sure, and it is possible. We have enforced, at least on one of these that we knew about, it's possible that some of these have gone up not unpermitted. There was a case with, I believe it was AT&T, who thought they were not in our jurisdiction, because they were on SCDOT right of way. So we had to have multiple conversations with SCDOT about their permitting process and guidelines, and we've settled that issue and received that application now. But it's certainly possible that some have gone up under our nose because the applicants believe they weren't in our jurisdiction.
So just to follow up for the public, because I know there are some people on this meeting call, Mr. Lanier. So the rule about that is if they're in the city limits, they go through our permitting process. Is that right?
Yes, and all of the ones we've received, well, and what this ordinance really addresses, I believe, are right-of-way installations. So there was question early on if it's in DOT right-of-way, do we have the permitting jurisdiction, which we have since confirmed and kind of finalized in writing that we do. But I think that led to confusion, at least on the applicant end early on, who felt that they could just go through DOT and that would be that. We have followed that, closed that loop, and DOT has said we're not allowing anything that the city doesn't allow if it's in our jurisdiction or adjacent to our jurisdiction, rather. So
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate being able to speak. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for having us have this update. Ms. Herdina, could you touch base, I guess, on from here?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. So just wanted to update council on a few things. As you're aware, back in 2017, Crown Castle did file a lawsuit in federal court against the city, alleging that we were delaying in processing their applications, that we had failed to adopt necessary ordinances, and basically we're not taking any meaningful steps to address the rules and regulations for small cells that had been issued by the FCC. They claim that we were in fact imposing a moratorium by not processing their applications. So there's been a lot of discovery in the case and some motions, and last year's Crown Castle filed a motion for summary judgment. And the overall, the court's decision, which actually just came out a few weeks ago, was overall helpful to the city in that the judge ruled that many of the arguments were moot, because since the time that the case was initially filed, the city had gone ahead, thanks to city council's efforts, and had passed a small cell ordinance and the design guidelines, which we're following. And that was important because Crown Castle was arguing that because in their view, we hadn't proactively taken steps to allow them to install their technology, they should in fact be granted the ability by the court to place their technology any place they wanted to. So the judge's ruling was important because it's found that no, we had passed the ordinance, we had passed the design guidelines, and that we could process the permits applications under those guidelines. Court also found that the city's actions did not amount to an effective moratorium, so that was also a helpful ruling. However, the court did order that we process the applications and make decisions on either approving or disapproving by this month. So that's the process that Jordan just described to you that we've been going through, and he's been discussing each and every one of them with the mayor. So we'll be complying with the court's ruling on that. I don't know what the judge's position will be on the ones that we've denied. Hopefully we've convinced him that they are in sensitive historic areas and that he will not compel us to install the technology there. So that is what's going on in the Crown Castle case. What the process of reviewing the applications, however, has done is made us aware that we do need to make some changes to our ordinance and to the design guidelines to make them more practical in some respects. There's some technology that actually we think is better that we didn't necessarily allow in the first go around on the guidelines. So we will probably be bringing something back to you soon to make some changes to the guidelines. That being said, we're still constrained by the FCC law, particularly with respect to this issue of health and whether or not the radio frequency or electronic magnetic radiation has an impact on health. And all that is required, or what is required at this point, is under federal law, is that the applicants submit this engineering certificate to the city saying that the frequency that's emitted from the technology is not harmful to health. That is that's a standard that, all the citizens, all the advocates need to be working on to change. Because again, that is, if the science supports something different, the FCC should be looking at that, and we're hopeful that they will try to do that. And if council remembers, we had passed a resolution, you had all passed a resolution a couple months urging the federal legislators to look at the issue of health from more than just the FCC perspective, but from OSHA's perspective and US EPA's perspective. And that effort needs to continue. So in the meantime, though, we are all watching very closely what's happening in the federal courts. There are cases that are pending, particularly out west, that are challenging the federal regulations. And so we'll be watching those. And if perchance there is a declaration that the law has changed, that is something we're going to take into consideration. Finally, I would just note that the small cell industry is very actively proposing legislation, in state court. It's pretty much a one-size-fits-all piece of legislation. We've talked about this before. It takes away individual cities' abilities, some discretion on the placement of the technology. And that legislation did not pass this last session. However, we expect, it's going to be renewed again. And the city is, I can tell you, the city is working very hard to try to preserve its position in with respect to this legislation, and not let our efforts to pass an ordinance and guidelines, which we think here better than the one-size-fit-all legislation that's being proposed in Columbia. So, that's a quick update. There's a lot going on in this area, as I'm sure all of you know, and we are trying to do everything we can to make sure we are consistent with the law, complying with the law, but at the same time very sensitive to the concerns of the citizens of our city as to where this equipment is being placed, and we'll continue those efforts.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Herdina, and thank everybody for being poised for that update on really a very sensitive subject. The last item on our agenda would be the item about Dominion and tree trimming, which has been a topic. Mr. McQueenie addressed that the city's version very well in the newspapers a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago. But Mr. Noble and his group, at least Mr. Noble anyway, I think wanted to have a few words, but I think I'll address this by, first, I'm gonna actually turn the committee over to the vice chair, which is Councilman Griffin. Mr. Mayor, I actually have to run out of here on a little emergency, so
Okay.
I'm not gonna be able to finish, but certainly wanted to give air and opportunity for any best practices that maybe we are not employing. If others know about things, they can have a voice, and that's what this is. So, Councilman Griffin, if you'd be kind enough to take them here, I'm in your debt, but I'll hang in here for a few minutes so I can listen to some of the discussion.
Oh, well, is
Thank you,
Jordan
sir.
still here? Lanier, is he still on the phone?
I am still here, yes, sir.
Hey, do you mind after this meeting if I ask you a question about a specific permit?
Yes, certainly.
Hey, buddy, I'll hit you up after this meeting's over.
Okay, I'll be here.
All right, and the last item on our agenda, I think we ought to give the floor to Mr. Noble and let him share his concerns, and then we can take it from there.
Okay.
Mr. Noble, you there?
Maybe he may need to unmute himself.
Yeah, it looked like he just tried to.
Oh, okay.
Here he comes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, again, I just want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk with you as a committee about this issue that you no doubt ever know that it's been a real problem and continues to be a big problem with the way Dominion has been cutting trees around the city. I think it's worth just recounting very briefly that how this all came about. And I didn't set out to do this, to be quite honest. I was just literally taking a nap on my sofa one day, and I was jarred awake by the sound of chainsaws. And I went outside and asked the guy who was butchering the trees what was going on. And he basically said, not too politely, "We're cutting, there's nothing you can do about it, and get out of here." So I called City Councilman Mike Seekings, and Mike said, "We got a cutting agreement with him. There's nothing we can do." And he said, if you can figure out something we can do, let me know. So I called another neighbor, Billy Want, who many of you know is one of the premier environmental attorneys in the South. He was one of the founders of the Southern Environmental Law Center. And Billy went to work and I went to work, and there were essentially two tracks. One is Billy did the legal research, and there were some really basic misunderstandings that are inconsistent with the law, and I'd like to just hit on very quickly. One was that that Dominion had an agreement with the city that was based on the idea of 12-foot cuttings, and that there was required by law that this would be happened by federal and or state, and that the city had nothing to do with it. Well, the research which we have provided to the mayor and to the city and to everybody who will take it really shows three things. Number one, the city is the only one who has the authority to regulate cutting into residential areas. Certainly the Fed and state regulate what's called transmission lines, the lines from the substations and the power plants, the high voltage stuff. That's all very heavily regulated. But from the substation to the citizens, the distribution line, that is solely the prerogative of the city. So that's one. Second is that this notion of 10-foot cutting distance was required, and required by law and required by regulators. Well, that's not so. It's simply not so. And we have provided to the chairman, and I hope he passed it on to y'all, a number of examples of cities around the country who have a considerably smaller cutting radius. For example, New York City, Con Ed, they have only 6 feet cutting. And a number of other cities are less. And the reality is that Dominion could cut 6 feet. They'd have to come back and cut more often, which is a financial issue for them. But the reality is, we think that if Charleston is going to be the kind of world-class city it is, then we need a world-class cutting standard and not just accept whatever is thrown to us by Dominion. And then the third piece was that they are abiding by the agreement. And that's clearly not so as well. We hired a videographer to go around and video the cuttings so they could be measured. We hired a arborist who had also been monitoring the tree cutting in the town of James Island. They too have cutting problems over there where Dominion is not abiding by the agreement. And the reality is that Dominion has essentially abrogated the agreement with the city simply because they haven't abided by the cutting practices that are prescribed. And I won't bore you with all the details, but since we started doing this, we have heard from city officials in Isle of Palms, Sullivan's Island, Mount Pleasant, McClellanville, Aiken, all of whom are saying, tell us what's going on. We got a big problem here. And it's a pattern of dominion everywhere is the reality of this. And we think that the solution is to issue a citywide stop work order until we can sort this out in a couple of ways. Number one, we need a mechanism to enforce the current agreement. And there's no mechanism to effectively do that. And then we think, secondly, we need a new agreement. And the new agreement can be developed at any time because Dominion has violated the old agreement, which means the city can declare it null and void. And then the third, the long-term thing, is we need some sort of long-term plan with a timetable to bury the power lines. Some places it can be done, some places it can't. But clearly we need a system and a timetable that is effective, that everybody can live with. And so that's the bottom line here. We've had hundreds of people sign our petitions. I'm told that y'all have been receiving, a lot of you have been receiving phone calls. We have neighborhood associations that have signed on their support. And twice in the past, the mayor has issued stop work orders in neighborhoods. And quite frankly, there's a lot of discussion as to why is it that some neighborhoods get a stop work order and others don't. So that we met with the mayor and the city officials, and we provided them with all the information about the legal background, the legal brief, the report from the arborist, the report from the other cities, and we just think that a stop work order is the best way to go.
Well, thank you, Mr. Noble, for weighing in on that and those details with us. Would any council members like to speak on this? Anybody?
I'll say something. Thanks, Councilmember Griffin. This is a familiar issue to me. When the tree crews came through Burns Downs last year, it caused a uproar, as one might imagine. And as the resident zoning and land use attorney, I started getting all kinds of phone calls from my friends and others in the neighborhood to start looking into this. And long story short, went to the city zoning ordinance, found that there was an exemption from our tree protection regulations for electric utilities, but only if those electric utilities had an agreement with the city to sort of prescribe a alternative approach for how these trees are supposed to be handled, because I guess the thought process was, you can't have individual permits for all these trees, just given the volume of trees that Dominion and previously SC&G had to get to. And let's also face it, I mean, it's an important job, given the fact that we've got above ground power lines. I'd love to see us get to a point where we've got much more underground utilities, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But long story short, after a Freedom of Information Act request, found out that the agreement that the city had in place expired in 1989 when I was 5 years old. So that information was provided to the folks over in Old Windermere, which sorry don't want to offend my constituents in Riverland Terrace, but Old Windermere, they've got probably the nicest Grand Oaks canopy in the street as you're going to find anywhere in the country. And to Mayor Tecklenburg's credit, he was out there in the streets demanding the folks stop, and they did, until this agreement that we're talking about now could be negotiated and put into effect. So this is a live issue. This is an issue that pops up, every time the crews come through. There does seem to be an indication that Dominion and their contractors are maybe a little bit more aggressive than the SC&G folks were. I mean, let's not forget, Dominion is a new player on the scene here in South Carolina, having come in under some unfortunate circumstances. And this is a complicated issue. It's not one that lends itself to simple solutions. But I'm a big supporter of doing whatever we can do from a legal perspective that's within our rights as a city to ensure that proper balance is struck. Because we got to face it. I mean, this is a very special place that prides itself on the charm of its environment and its environ. So we can't just let whatever happen. We have to figure out where the line is and get about as close to it as possible to make sure that we're preserving and protecting what makes our areas so special. So I'm a big supporter of continuing this conversation. I think that we probably ought to talk to Susan and Chip about it, perhaps in an executive session, maybe at the next Public Works meeting, so we can get a full take from our legal department in terms of what our responsibilities are, what our obligations are, what our rights are with respect to this matter, because I do think it's a very important one, and we got to continue to stay engaged on this issue. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to weigh in on this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I would like to just point out that, and thank you, Councilmember Appel, for that brief history of our new agreement with Dominion, and acknowledge that this has been an ongoing issue for decades, as now Dominion, formerly SC&G, have been trimming trees to, in their view, to provide reliable electric service. And our trees are so important to our city in so many ways, from the aesthetics to the fact that they help absorb water to our quality of life. So there's this kind of balancing act we're on with them to do both. And Mr. Noble's certainly correct about one item, and that's that the long-term solution is to underground as many power lines, particularly those in places where we have sensitive tree canopies. So about the same time or after we got this new agreement in place, just to let everybody know, we formed an undergrounding committee to review the city's position on getting power lines underground. And it was a system that had been set up over 20, 25 years ago. And to be honest with you, the part was in the ditch, and some changes need to be made to that protocol. So we have this committee in place. They had 2 meetings. Troy Miller is now the chairman of the committee. We're making good progress to review the neighborhoods that were already in line for a long, long time to get undergrounding done, and why it hadn't been done, and to try to change the protocol and the rules of the game a little bit so we can expedite, particularly in sensitive areas, for undergrounding to occur. So of course, like many things, coronavirus kind of delayed things. I have confirmed that even virtually they've rescheduled. Their next meeting will be on June 30th, I'm told, at 2 o'clock. So they are continuing their work. And, we actually have some money in the bank right now. And the formula is such that Dominion will pay, I think it's 50 or 55% of the cost of undergrounding. We pay a portion, the neighborhood pays a portion. So I admit we need to continue those efforts, get that going without belaboring it. And believe you me, I don't want to stand up and make an excuse for Dominion, but to let you know, we do have David Grant, our city arborist, who was present when cuts are made. And does every cut abide by the agreement? Probably not. And he may have sent the video and the other thing from the arborist, but I have to report. But I think maybe it went to Chip McQueenie. I hadn't seen it yet. But there are many cuts that are done right too. So we are working with them. We're trying to get the undergrounding done. We're monitoring our existing agreement. Could it be better next time it's negotiated? Maybe so. New York, I don't know if trees grow as fast as they do in South Carolina, but anyway, I just thought I'd add those comments. I'd be curious about legal's position on this, but as Councilmember Appel said, maybe that's a better thing for a little executive session. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Mr. Mayor. And if I may just chime in, I agree that we need to continue to evaluate this procedure. But I think it would be hasty for us to issue any stop work orders at this time. I think what would be a better idea is to keep this conversation going by inviting some Dominion representatives, especially maybe Danny Cassis, to our next meeting, and allow him to also kind of share their practices. And I'm sure that they would be open to some constructive criticism to make their process better. If anything I can say about Dominion and a lot of the key players that came over from SC&G and that are still there today, is that they've always been a willing participant to all city functions. They've been at this meeting several times before. They're open to ideas, and I would hate for us to kind of come in with a heavy hand right now, rather than we need to continue to hear not only what our options are legally, but also give them an opportunity to be part of the discussion, because they've been great partners for us. And like you said, Mr. Mayor, even though there may have been some cuts that have been done wrong, they've done a lot right. And as we continue to move towards underground, we need to make sure that they're always at the table. And they've been a great partner for us. So I would love to have them come to a future meeting in the very near future and also be part of this conversation.
And they serve, by the way, on our underground committee and on our sustainability committee. And we'll have a report to council this Tuesday evening about conversion of our streetlights to LEDs and other initiatives we're working with them on.
Thank you. And I don't think we plan on taking any action on this matter today other than hearing Mr. Noble's comments and having a discussion, but we will get this on the next agenda to be brought up again. And maybe we can have an update from legal on where we stand with that contract and maybe go through some ins and outs of that in an executive session at the next meeting.
Mr.
Any
Chairman,
other comments on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, can I make a couple of comments and ask a question?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Number one, thank you. Absolutely. We believe that Dominion has an important job to do, and they often, we can leave it to the arborists to decide how often, they cut very well. And we have publicly congratulated Dominion on a couple of occasions when they have cut well, and the citizens have applauded that. Additionally, we have reached out to Dominion, and they have failed to respond to us at all. So we have done everything we know we can do. I do appreciate the mayor saying that there are times when they're not cutting appropriately, and I think that is the issue, and that they're not doing it, and they're continuing not to do it. And Troy Miller and his committee is a wonderful thing. But I'd like to point out that Troy and the Rural and Terrace Neighborhood Association have specifically endorsed the idea of a stop work order because they understand that it's not just their trees, but it's the whole city that has a real problem with this. And so, again, while we're talking, they're cutting. And I'd like to respectfully ask the mayor, what was the criteria that he used for his two previous stop work orders? And what is the requirements for a stop work order now?
Well, Phil, I'm not an arborist, so I rely on the recommendation of our arborist, David Grant. If he witnesses a cutting that he thinks is egregious, they'll contact me, and I rely on their advice.
So it's up to the arborist to decide whether or not there should be a stop work order?
I make the decision, but I base it on their recommendation. Yes, sir.
Okay. We will focus some attention on providing him information.
I think that's a good idea. And I don't know if our arborist is on the call or not, but you're certainly welcome to reach out to him. And I want you to know that we're going to continue. This is a very important issue. And I appreciate all of the hard work and sentiment that you put into this, Mr. Noble. It's a very noble cause that you've done here. And you know, it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. When we signed the agreement, that didn't mean that we were going to wash our hands with it. Obviously, through our sustainability committee and also this underground committee that we've started, we're looking to make sure that Dominion Energy and our community are well represented and are well taken care of. So I appreciate you coming here today. And we will continue to have this conversation and hopefully be able to get your concerns addressed by Dominion in a very diplomatic way for all of us, so that we can hopefully not have any more trees that are inappropriately cut. But we also don't want them to stop the good work that they are doing. And so thank you so much for coming here today, and feel free to follow up with our arborist.
We will.
All right. Is there anything else to come before this committee today? If not, by acclamation, we stand adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.